So this is the lap quilt project. You have three pieces of fabric. One piece of fabric that's 1.5 yards, one piece of fabric that's 1 yard, and one piece of fabric that's 2 yards. We're not going to use the 2-yard fabric right now. We're going to start with the 1.5 yards. So you again, after you iron all your fabric, iron all the wrinkles out, you're going to put right sides together, salvage edge to salvage edge. Make sure there's no creases and the salvage edges are all lined up with each other. Alright, so righties are going to start on the right side of the fabric, lefties will start on the left. You're going to clean cut the one side. You're going to line up the black horizontal line on the ruler to the fold edge of the fabric. You're going to waste the least amount of fabric on the right. Double check that it's on the fold. Remember the crab crawl position, left pinky is always on the left edge of the ruler, as if there's a tennis ball underneath the palm of your hand. Press down on your left hand, engage the rotary blade. Start off the fabric, go about 1 inch past your middle finger, stop with your right hand, keep it in place. Crab crawl up with your left, push down with your left, start cutting with your right, stop with your right, crab crawl up with the left, and finish your cut. Remove that piece of fabric, recut if you missed any, take the ruler off. You're now going to rotate the fabric 180 degrees. So the newly cut edge is going to be on the left side, and for lefties it will be on your right side. So for the 1.5 yards, which is this piece, I am going to cut 6 strips. I'm going to take my ruler, make sure your edges are lined up. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line up the left edge of the ruler all the way top and bottom. And I'm going to cut a 6-inch wide strip. Crab crawl up, remove the fabric. So here's my first strip. Make sure this edge is all lined up. Line up to the edge. Crab crawl. Retract the blade every time you put the blade down on the table. 2 strips. Engage the blade. 3. 4. 5. 6. Take the leftover fabric off. Now you've got 6 strips of the 1.5 yards. You're going to take fabric number 2, the 1 yard, and you're going to do the exact same thing, but you're going to cut 5 strips. Now that I did that before we started the video, so now I've got 5 strips and 6 strips. I'm going to open up the strips. I'm going to take 1 of each. You have to notice that if your fabric is directional, this actually is slightly directional, so it's going to determine which way I lay this. So I'm going to line them up next to each other. One fabric might be longer than the other. What I need you to do is make sure that when you line these up, that you're going to center the shorter fabric over top of the longer fabric. You're going to, this is the seam right here that I want to sew, so I'm going to line up this edge. I'm going to turn the fabric towards me. I'm going to take my pins. I'm going to center the dark floral fabric on top of the orange fabric with a little bit hanging off the edge on this side and a little bit on this side. I'm going to line up the edges and I'm going to pin. I'm going to line up this edge. I'm going to line up the edges as I go. I'm going to move this, make sure these edges are even, and I'm going to pin. Keep it flat on the table so when you flip it over, I don't see any of the floral hanging over and I shouldn't see any of the orange. There's a little bit, so I'm going to scooch it down. So you're going to continue pinning your strips together. So this is one strip that's pinned. What I'll do is take it over to my sewing machine. I'm going to start at the top of where this overhang is. Start right here. We're going to go, remember to go forward 5 stitches, back 5 stitches. You need to be on the 5/8 seam allowance. You're going to line up your fabric to the 5/8 seam allowance. You're going to put down your presser foot. You're going to start at the edge of the fabric. You're going to go forward 5 stitches, back 5 stitches. You're also using stitch length number 2 on your dial. Take out your pin. Go nice and slow. I'm going a little fast. Stay on the 5/8. Stop when you get to a pin. Take it out. Keep your fabric aligned. Get to the end and reverse and go forward. Take your fabric out and let's go back over to the cutting table. Now that we have stripped the first 2 strips sewn together, you're going to open them up and we are going to lay the next strip down. We're going to be alternating colors. So we're going to line it up right next to it and we're going to flip it, put right sides together, and we're going to pin this edge together. So there's 2 ways of doing this. You can either sew 2 strips, sew the next strip, open it up, put the next color down, sew that. Or what I generally like to do is put 2 strips together at a time, sew all my strips, and then come together and sew the 2 strips together at a time. So I will, right now just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to line this one up, and I'm going to put this one. This has a slight direction, this and this is in the right direction. I'm going to lay this over the right side. I'm going to line up. We want to keep the strips even, so we're going to keep these 2 at the same level. I'll pull the fabric around. And I could start pinning this edge. Okay, so we'll just pin the edge. We'll sew it like we did before on 5/8. You're going to be alternating from one color to the next, back to the first color. You will end up having your 6-inch your 6 strips. The same color is going to be on the top and the same color will be on the bottom, and then the 5 strips will be alternating in between. Once you finish all your strips, you're going to press all your seams open, and then we will go on to cutting next. Okay, so now we've sewn all our strips together, alternating colors, and the 6 strips, they'll be the same on the ends, on both ends, and the 5 strips will be in between. Then what you're going to do is, once you've sewn everything together, you're going to take it over to the ironing board, and I've already done it, but you need to press your seams open. The seams are going to look like this. You need to press the seams open on all your stripes, all your strips. And once you've ironed the seams open, you're going to bring it over to the cutting table, and I will help you do this. We need to do what's called squaring off the quilt. We're going to line up the bottom edge of your fabric to this blue line on the table. And make sure it's even all the way around as best as possible. And now what we need to do is we're going to cut off the salvage edges of your fabric, and we're going to make this all nice and even. So I will help you do this. We're going to take a ruler, and we are going to line up the ruler with the blue horizontal line on the bottom of the ruler, and then we're going to use this line, but you can't see it, so we have to lift up our fabric. And I'm going to cut the right side, and this is a 2-person job. And I'm going to scooch the ruler up. I'm going to keep it on this line here, and then I'm going to lift up the fabric to make sure I'm on a blue line underneath the fabric. And I'm going to cut again. And then scooch the ruler up one more time. It's lined up here, and I'm lined up on the blue line. And then I'm going to rotate the fabric. I'm going to put this newly cut edge on my opposite side, and I'm going to bring the salvage edge over here. And look how pretty that straight line is. And we're going to line up the blue line across here. Make sure there's no wrinkles or buckles in the middle of the quilt. We're going to pick a line. Again, I'm going to line up on this horizontal line. The bottom of the ruler is on the blue line. I'm going to peek underneath to make sure this side is still running on this blue line all the way up. All right, and then I'm going to cut. Scooch the ruler up. Make sure the seams are open while you're cutting. And the last cut. And the next step is we're going to layer all the batting with the quilt back. You need to iron your 2 yards of your back fabric, and we're going to assemble the pieces next. You're going to lay out your batting and make sure, spread it out and make sure there are no wrinkles anywhere in the batting. And next you're going to go get your, the batting goes first, your quilt back goes next, and then your stripes go last. So let me get the batting. So you're going to lay the back of your fabric, the back of the quilt fabric, face up right on top of the quilt batting. Be really careful when you lay this down that the batting doesn't wrinkle underneath. So run your hand over the whole top surface and make sure there's no bumps or lumps in the fabric. So once you have this all laid out, you'll then take your quilt top and you're going to put the right sides of the fabric together. You're going to lay this down and make sure it's in the middle of your, so my batting is here to here. So make sure that I have 3 layers sandwiched all the way through. Alright, make sure it's not wrinkled. Then what you do is take your pins and you're going to put about 5 or 6 pins randomly in the center of the quilt just to keep the fabric from shifting. And then now that you've got the center pinned, you're going to start on the sides, put your hand down in the middle, pull the fabric towards you, and pin the edge. You're going to pin all the way around about 2 or 3 fingers lengths away from the edge of the fabric. And you're going to pin every strip, and then you'll pin on the opposite ends every about 4 inches apart. This is a lot of pinning. And then pin the corner. Okay, so now it's pinned all the way around, and now I need to go get my scissors, and then we're going to cut around the outside. Get your scissors, and we're going to cut. We're going to use the top fabric, our stripe fabric, as our pattern. We need to cut along the edge of the fabric. Don't cut the top, but you're just going to cut the back of your fabric, and you're going to cut the batting. While you're cutting, I want you guys to run your scissors along the table, the bottom of the scissors, and you're going to be cutting in this part in small little bites of your of the fabric. Cut in this section. So start on an edge. Nice little small bites, and you'll keep the straighter the line, the better it will be when you go to sew on your sewing machine. So we're going to go around the entire, go nice and slow, little tiny bites. And there you go. And then we'll cut along this side. And we cut all the way around. Now we're going to take a ruler and we're going to mark 18 inches. You're going to mark this on the long side of the fabric, not the short side of the fabric. So anywhere in the middle of the long side, we're going to make a little mark. Just a little mark along the edge on 0 and 18. And we're going to put this into the sewing machine. We're going to start sewing on this mark here. Don't forget to go forward, reverse, go forward. And we're going to go all around the quilt and we're going to stop on the second mark. We're going to leave the 18 inches open. We're going to use 6/8 seam allowance and we're going to use stitch length number 3. That's very important. Again, it's 6/8 seam allowance and stitch length number 3. So we're now at the sewing machine. We have the 2 marks, the 18-inch mark. So there's one mark here on the long side and the other marks here. So the bottom mark, which is this one, we're going to load it into our sewing machine. We need to put it on 6/8 seam allowance. Put the needle at the 6/8 seam allowance. Put this down. We now need to sew on stitch length number 3. So we're going to turn the dial over here from 2 to 3. Okay, so we're going to go back to sewing. We're going to stitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forward and reverse and forward. And you're going to keep going. Stay on the 6/8 and make sure when you sew over the seams, the seam allowance that's pressed open, make sure it stays open and flat. So you're going to go all the way around, and if the fabric starts to bunch, the fabric might bunch in front of your presser foot. If it bunches too much, if there's a bunch like that, you're going to put the needle down, lift up the presser foot, spread out the fabric a little bit, hold it in place, and put the presser foot back down. Now you're going to go to the end. And keep the fabric nice and flat and moving along with you as you go. You're on 6/8. Make sure the edges don't shift. Remember, you're going to stop when your needle is about 6/8 of an inch from the needle to the front of you. Put the needle down, pivot and turn, and make sure that you're lined back up to your 6/8. And we're right there. You're going to turn your fabric around. Be careful of all the pins. Keep the pins in while you're sewing, otherwise the fabrics will all shift. And go a lot slower than this. I'm just going fast for the demonstration. So you're on 6/8, keeping all the fabric nice and flat and even along the edge. And now I'm just going to go all the way around. All right, we've gone all the way around, and we're coming to the last mark. We're going to stop, we're going to reverse, we're going to go forward, and we pull it out of the machine, cut your thread. Now we'll take it over to the cutting table, and we have to remove all our pins. So start taking all your pins out. Make sure you get every pin. It's bad if you sew a pin inside of your quilt. So all the pins are removed. You're now going to take the corner of your quilt and you're going to clip your corners. Remember, you're going to be about 1/4 of an inch away from the thread. Make sure you do not cut the thread. So you're going to clip that corner. Come on over here and clip this corner. Come on over here and clip this corner. And remember to throw out your corner scraps when you're done. Now you're going to come back to the side where your 18-inch opening is. So here's my opening. I'm going to reverse it. And we're going to pull the right sides out. And the batting is going to go inside. So get most of your corners out. Push them out with your hands. Lay it nice and flat. And then grab chopsticks or a pointer, or the white pointers, and bring it in and work the corner out so you have a nice 90-degree angle. Be really careful not to push the pointers through the end, so it's a nice 90-degree angle, so you're going to do that on all four corners. Now we're going to take this over to the ironing board and we're going to iron and pin our seam. Alright, so you're going to spray the edge with water. You need to fold, the batting needs to be here. You need to fold the back of the quilt over top of the batting. This fold needs to be 6/8 of an inch. This is the seam allowance that you've already sewed. So we need to duplicate this and we're going to sew a blind stitch. So we're going to fold the top one the same way. So I'm going to fold this and we're going to make this line as straight as possible. So take your time when you're folding. And you're going to iron. Keep the iron moving when it's flat on the ironing board. So we're just ironing along this edge. You want a nice crease. It's going to make life easier when you go to blind stitch, having a nice folded edge and ironed. You'll take your quilt, flip it over, and you'll iron the opposite side too. And then you'll take some pins. I like to pin with the stripes up. And you're going to pin the edge. Keep the pins pretty close. And then you're going to blind stitch the entire opening. And do not take your pins out until the blind stitch is done. Okay, so now you've finished blind stitching, which is over here, and you shouldn't be able to see it. And the best thing to do is make sure that you have thread that matches the fabric. So right there you can kind of see some tan. That's your blind stitch. So we're going to pin around the outside of the whole quilt. I started it. What we need to do is we want to open up the fabric. It's kind of buckled in. We want to open up the fabric so the seam is right along the very edge. So flatten this out. And you're going to pin. See how the tan is moving past the top of the fabric? We want to make sure it's nice and even. So we're going to kind of bunch that underneath. And it's okay to pin close to the edge. We're going to take the pins out as we go. Alright, now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew around the outside. Okay, now we're going to do, we're going to sew around the outside edge. We're going to do it with a 6/8 seam allowance. You can use whatever color thread you want if you want it to blend in with your fabric, or if you want to use it as a decoration with an interesting color, you can do that. I like to start at a seam. We're going to start at 6/8. I like to start at a seam because we need to hide the reverse stitch. So we're going to go forward 5 stitches. Oh, and don't forget, we need to put the sewing machine on stitch length number 3. So turn it onto stitch length 3, and then you're ready to sew. So go forward 5 stitches, excuse me, reverse 5 stitches, and go forward. So we are going to be really careful that we have to make sure that this little edge that the seam is along the outside edge. So now we're going to sew all the way around. If the fabric, don't run over the pins. If the fabric starts to bunch up a little bit, remember, just put the needle down, lift up the presser foot, spread out the fabric a little bit, hold it down, and put the pressure foot back down. And now we're just going to sew all the way around. Now that we've gone all the way around the outside on 6/8, we did it all the way around. Now we're going to hand tie some embroidery. We're going to use embroidery floss to hand tie the center of the quilt. You're going to take your quilt right side up and you're going to fold it in half. And along the outer edges of this stripe, you're going to mark a little dot, and this stripe, you're going to mark a little dot. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 from each end. 1, 2, 3, 4. Little tiny dots. Then you're going to fold the quilt again long ways. And now you're going to put a little dot on the first, the middle, and the first one over here. And then we're going to open it back up, fold it this way, line it all up, and again we're going to do this first strip, the middle strip, and then this strip. So when you open up the quilt, you're going to have 2 dots on this strip, 1 dot here, 2 dots here, 1 dot here, and 2 dots. We used a disappearing ink, so it will fade with time. So make the marks as small as possible so you can just barely see them. You're going to take some embroidery floss. Now I have 3 strands through my needle of embroidery thread, and it's through an embroidery needle. So you're going to take 1 little running stitch, you're going to go down and up. Make sure you go all the way through the back, just a little bit. You're going to pull the needle so you have about 2 inches hanging off, and you're going to double knot. 1, 2. You're going to double knot the thread, and then you can cut it, and I like to leave just a little bit hanging off just for decoration. So now you're going to tie knots on all the dots that we marked with the fabric marker. Now we're going to tie the last dot. Put the needle through, a small stitch, make sure it's going through the back, and you're going to pull. So the tail is about 2 inches long, and then you're going to double knot. 1 tie, and second tie. And you're going to clip it, and now your quilt is done.